Hi folks and welcome back. Today I'm going to give you my thoughts on Company of Heroes 3, which I've been playing a little bit on and off stream over the last week, and I'm happy to report that I think it's a pretty good game. It actually plays very similar to the first two games in the series, which is a good thing as I enjoyed both of those as well, particularly the first one, which I played a lot of. But before we get into the details, for those of you who aren't familiar with the series, what exactly is Company of Heroes 3? Well, it's a World War II squad-based real-time strategy war game where you control a handful of troops and vehicles thrown into a battlefield, and you have to fight for control of key resource points and strategic points on the battlefield against an enemy squad trying to do the same thing. Basically, control of these points will give you resources and command points, allowing you to build up a little base, build some upgrades, bring in new units and vehicles, and eventually throw the enemy off the battlefield altogether. It is essentially classic RTS gameplay. Control the points, get more resources than the enemy, build up a bigger army, and smite them heartily. And if you like that sort of thing, then you'll like Company of Heroes 3, because it does it very well. Now, there are several game modes you can play in Company of Heroes 3, but they are essentially based around that type of gameplay. First up, this time around, the developers included a full military campaign where you control the Allied forces in the invasion of Italy. The idea being to move your troops around the map, throw the enemy out of important towns and villages and other locations like airfields and ports. The troops that survive will gain experience and you can upgrade them and you can bring in reinforcements. It's a nice addition to the game, but it's not a very deep campaign. You're not going to get something on the lines of Hearts of Iron 4 here. It's a lot more basic than that, perhaps more in line with a cut-down version of a Total War game. But it's not a bad feature and it adds a bit of interest. There's also a story mode that you can play where you actually play as the Desert Africa Corps in North Africa under Rommel. It's a little bit strange because the story is actually told from the perspective of a native of the region who goes to fight for the British, but when you play the battles you're fighting as the Germans trying to smite the British and the side of the storyteller. So it feels a little bit disjointed in that respect, but basically it's just an excuse to link several scenarios and missions together with a little bit of a narrative in between. And it doesn't matter because you play it for the combat and the missions, which aren't bad actually. And then you can go in for a good old skirmish mode, which just you get to choose any of the maps available in the game, and you get to choose a type of troops on each side, be it an infantry company or an armoured company maybe, and you get to choose difficulty, number of players, and you just fight for control of that map, and once it's over, it's over. And there's quite a bit of variations on the missions available for these maps, so it's not all about wiping the enemy off. It might be for holding out for a certain length of time, or just scoring more control points. Basically, it keeps it fresh and interesting. So you've basically got the campaign mode, the story mode, and then the skirmish mode, be it in single or multiplayer or co-op multiplayer or single with AI fighting other AI. There's quite a bit in there, but it's all based around that core RTS gameplay on the battlefield, which is good because that is the best feature of the game as it was of the previous Company of Heroes games. Now, what about the graphics and sound? Well, I thought all the battlefields looked really good, and I loved the way that buildings and objects react to explosions in the game. It makes them feel alive, and I like the way that buildings can be levelled if they're hit with enough high explosive. I'm not so convinced about the campaign map, however. I think this looks really basic and stark. Compared to some of the Total War games, the latest in that series, those maps look brilliant. And I feel like this campaign mode was kind of robbed from those games. So you would think that they would have brought the nice idea of the maps across as well. But no, this looks very basic. However, it does its job, and you buy this game for the combat, not for looking at pretty strategic battle maps, right? The game's sound effects are also very good. I love all the bombs and bullets going off and people shouting. However, I think some of the accents used in the voiceover feel just a little bit forced, like people trying to put on the Cockney Dick Van Dyke accent or the German officer accent. They just feel a little bit contrived.
In desert warfare, it all comes down to fuel and water. Berlin wants a task force sent to Benghazi, but I have other plans.
Now, I didn't have any performance issues at all with the game. It all ran very smoothly on my rig, and I was quite happy with that. Alright then, on to my likes and dislikes, and starting as always with the good stuff. My most favourite thing about Company of Heroes 3 is the combat. Yes, it's fast and it's frantic, and it can sometimes feel like a nightmare trying to micromanage half a dozen or more different squads in a firefight, but it really does feel like it's your actions that make the difference over whether you will win or lose a situation. So if you can get it together, control everything, it feels great. Also looks and sounds great. I mean, to be honest, it doesn't feel any different to the previous Company of Heroes games, but that's not a bad thing. And this is a really important point to emphasise. The combat being good in this game is critical for it, because the other modes, the story mode and the campaign mode, whilst they offer a little bit of a different narrative to what you're doing, you are basically doing the same thing. It is combat. And this has to be good, because this is what carries the entire game. Unfortunately, they got it right. I also like the fact that there's a nice variety of units to use in the game. You basically have different combat companies, like an armoured company, an artillery company, an airborne or an infantry company. And within those companies, they have different specialised troops, from your assault engineers to mortar squads to light vehicles and heavily armoured vehicles, support vehicles, different abilities they can call on in combat. I do like the variety, because it means that there's going to be something for everyone. Whatever your style of play is in these RTS games, there's going to be one of these companies that suits you. And also, you never really get bored of playing the same thing, because eventually you think, well, you know what, I'm going to go and try out one of these other squads with this different play style. And that's good. Also, when you're playing the campaign, you can bring these different companies to bear against the enemy. So you've got something different to play with and upgrade and play out and try out there. Now, I've mentioned multiple times that the combat is often fast and frantic. If you're playing in single player mode, there's a pause feature. This is fantastic, because when you've got 10 squads all about to get killed all at the same time, and it's all going off, and some of your soldiers are sitting under a grenade and some more are sitting under mortar fire, and the tank's pointing the wrong way, and you just need to sort it all out, you can just hit the spacebar and just pause the action, which is so appreciated. It allows you to give tactical orders to each squad to get them to move out the way, to attack something else, to jump into a building for cover, or do whatever you want to do with them. When you hit pause again, they all act it out. That is really, really, really useful, and I know there's a lot of players will appreciate that. However, one mode that you can't use pause in for obvious reasons is multiplayer. And this is another aspect of the game that I like, because getting to play with your friends is awesome. And you don't just have to be player versus player. You can be co-op against the AI. And that's something that my wife and I actually played loads of on the original Company of Heroes game. We absolutely loved it. And whether you're playing multiplayer against other people or against the AI, you're not just limited to 2 versus 2 either. Some of the maps can be much bigger with multiple opponents or allies on each side. Okay then, on to the bad stuff. What did I not like about the game? Thankfully, there's nothing too major in here, but just lots of little things. For example, the story mode in the game. You play as the Desert Africa Corps, the German troops fighting across North Africa under Rommel, trying to push the British and their Commonwealth allies back, which is fine. I have no problem with that. But it's a story mode, and the story is told from the perspective of a native of Benghazi who decides to join the British army to fight the German invaders. And then there's also some story about his family who get left behind at home and have to deal with the German occupation. Now, it feels really weird having a story being told from the perspective of someone that you then, in theory, have to go and try and kill when you're playing the game. It just doesn't sit well with me. There was another game that did it like this. I think it was Star Wars Squadrons, where you, in their story mode, you switched between the Rebels and the Empire after every mission, and it just doesn't feel right. You're like being told about what's going on from one person's perspective and then trying to destroy that person in the next one. And I don't know, I didn't like it very much like that. I'd rather it was just told from the perspective of someone in the German army if you're going to play as the Germans. But hey, that's just me. Now, the story mode is heavily scripted, obviously, and it is just an excuse just to link several scenarios together in which you just have fights, and there's a little bit of narrative in between. So we can quite happily ignore the story and skip through it and just play the battles, because there's nothing wrong with those. It is literally just the narrative that I didn't like. And then we come to the campaign mode, and there's a few elements about this that I didn't like either. For a start, it wasn't the big open campaign that I thought it was going to be, where you can choose exactly where you want to go and attack and in what order, and the enemy are trying to counterattack. It is still partially scripted. Now, you can move your units around more or less where you want them to go within some predefined limits on the Italian map, but there are certain objectives you have to do in order to open up later things. And also certain actions or movements trigger scripted events as well, and scripted missions. It's not terribly bad, don't get me wrong. I just want you to be aware that if you're going to get this for the campaign, that it's not quite the open campaign that you might be expecting. It's not like Hearts of Iron, which is very deep and strategic and allows you to do whatever you want in whatever order. This is a lot more basic and also a little bit more scripted as well. There's also another feature in the campaign where you have to keep your generals happy. You've got the British general, you've got an American general, and once you free them up, you've got an Italian partisan leader as well. And the actions you take and the decisions that you choose will decide how happy each of those three factions, if you like, are with your leadership, and that affects the loyalty of those troops under your command. And this just feels like a bit of an element that didn't really need to be put in, because occasionally you'll get the American general saying, hey, we should push for Rome, and you get the British general counter it with, oh no, old chap, we need to consolidate our hold. And you have to decide which one you're going to do from a prompt on the screen, and it upsets the other one. And yeah, I don't like stuff like that. If they wanted to go deeper into the campaign, they should have put more thought into supply and logistics and reinforcement and stuff like that, rather than this superficial sort of element to it. But anyway, it's not a deal breaker either. The campaign is just basically there to link together a series of battles as well. And again, we play this for the combat, not for the deep and meaningful campaign. Let's be very clear on this. If you're buying Company of Heroes 3, you're buying it for the combat, which is excellent, not for the campaign or the story. Just bear that in mind. And so in conclusion, I am happy to recommend Company of Heroes 3 if you're into real-time strategy games. If you like World War II combat games, there's nothing wrong with this. It's perfectly fine. So overall, pretty good game. Anyway, that's it for now. The next game I'm going to be testing out and bringing you a video on is an early access game called Wild West Dynasty. I love the medieval version of this, as you've probably seen on the channel. So if you want to watch me testing that out, then come and check me out at twitch.tv/MarkGFL, and we'll give it a try together. And also playing some Pathfinder on the channel this week as well. So do come along and watch. All right, folks, thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts as always, and I'll catch you next time.